10. He was born into the same storm that created a legend. Lee Chan-hui was born in Hong Kong in 1948, right into the same whirlwind that shaped Bruce Lee's destiny. Their father, Lee Hui-chuen, was one of Hong Kong's leading Cantonese opera stars. Disciplined, respected, but often away on tour. Their mother, Grace Ho, came from one of the most influential Eurasian families in Hong Kong, giving the Lees a rare mix of Chinese discipline and Western modernity. When Bruce was already showing off his energy, shadowboxing in the living room as a child, Chan-hui grew up quietly in the same apartment, absorbing everything around him. The two brothers weren't opposites. They were reflections of one another. But where Bruce exploded outward, bold, defiant, unstoppable, Chan-hui turned inward. He studied more, spoke less, and preferred sketching or reading to fighting. Still, he idolized Bruce. Imagine being a small boy watching your older brother practicing nunchaku in the narrow hallway, hearing him shout, "Wa ta!" at the mirror. Bruce was 8 years older, and by the time Chan-hui entered grade school, Bruce had already become a local child star in Hong Kong films. Teachers and friends would whisper, "That's Bruce Lee's brother." For Chan-hui, every classroom became a reminder of the impossible standard he had to live up to. He loved Bruce deeply, but that comparison followed him like a shadow he could never outrun. Yet, there's something extraordinary here. While Bruce was fighting on screen, Chan-hui was observing the family's deep cultural struggle, how being mixed race in post-war Hong Kong brought constant identity tension. This gave him a more grounded, thoughtful perspective. It is one reason historians later described him as the quiet observer of the Lee legacy. When Bruce left for America in 1959, Chan-hui stayed behind with their parents. That separation became a silent wound. Letters from Bruce would arrive filled with excitement about America, how he was studying philosophy, how he was teaching martial arts to white students, how he dreamed of changing the world. And Chan-hui, he wrote back, saying he'd help take care of their parents. It was a small gesture of loyalty, but it defined him. He wasn't the fighter or the actor, he was the guardian of home. And perhaps that's the most striking thing. If Bruce was the symbol of rebellion, Chan-hui became the symbol of quiet endurance. He lived through Hong Kong's shifting tides, the British colonial years, the chaos of modernization, watching from the sidelines as his brother became immortal. Number 9. He nearly became an actor like Bruce, but walked away. What most people don't know is that Lee Chan-hui almost followed in Bruce's cinematic footsteps. In the early 1960s, Hong Kong cinema was booming. Producers were desperate for fresh faces, especially anyone with the Lee surname. When Bruce's early fame from movies like The Kid and The Birth of Mankind started echoing through local studios, offers began flooding into the Lee household. One producer even told their father, if Bruce goes to America, the younger brother can take his place. Chan-hui was barely 15. He had his brother's sharp jawline and athletic frame, and he'd spent years watching Bruce rehearse on set. He knew the rhythm of cameras, the lights, the way his brother moved like a coiled spring before each take. The temptation was enormous. Fame, recognition, a way to honor the family name. But Chan-hui hesitated. Unlike Bruce, who thrived under pressure, Chan-hui hated the artificial world of show business. He'd seen the toll it took on their father. Long nights, endless rehearsals, directors shouting orders. More importantly, he didn't want to be a copy. "There can only be one Bruce," he reportedly told a friend years later. "The world doesn't need another imitation." Instead of stepping into the spotlight, he turned toward education. He studied literature and art, quietly building a world outside the fame machine. That decision made him an outsider even within his own family legacy. The Hong Kong press, always hungry for drama, would sometimes publish side-by-side photos of the two brothers. Bruce with his fierce stare and muscles, Chan-hui with his glasses and calm expression, captioned with cruel comparisons like the tiger and the cub. But history has a strange sense of irony. because when Bruce died in 1973, suddenly at the peak of his fame, the very brother who had stayed away from the cameras became one of the few remaining keepers of truth. He refused interviews for years, rejecting journalists who came knocking. "I don't want to profit from his death," he once said quietly. "He was my brother, not my brand." In a world obsessed with fame, that humility was revolutionary. Imagine it. While companies were fighting to use Bruce's image on posters, his own brother lived in a modest apartment, teaching, reading, and occasionally visiting his old neighborhood. He chose peace over publicity, and though that made him invisible to the world, it made him one of the few who understood Bruce Lee beyond the myth. There's a haunting beauty in that decision, because maybe the legacy of the Lee family was not meant to be two superstars, one blazing bright, one vanishing into silence, but rather a balance. Fire and earth, action and reflection, the dragon and the still water beneath it. Yipper 8. He witnessed the birth of Bruce Lee's philosophy before the world did, before the world heard Bruce Lee's famous words, "Be water, my friend." Lee Chan-hui had already seen those ideas taking shape in real time. Growing up under the same roof, he watched his older brother struggle with identity, philosophy, and frustration. Bruce wasn't just a fighter or actor, he was a thinker, constantly reading, scribbling quotes, and challenging everything around him. And Chan-hui, who loved books and ideas, became his first audience. Their conversations were intense. Bruce would talk late into the night about Taoism, self-expression, and breaking the boundaries of tradition. Chan-hui later recalled how Bruce would pace around the room, clenching his fists, trying to articulate something beyond words. The idea that fighting, movement, and life itself were connected through flow. When Bruce said, "Be water," he wasn't inventing something new. He was expressing a truth he'd been chewing on since his teenage years, a truth that had already rippled through the Lee household. One night, when their father was away performing and their mother was asleep, Bruce reportedly demonstrated his philosophy in the most literal way possible. He filled a bowl with water and placed a rock beside it. "See this?" he said. "The rock breaks, but water adapts." Then he pushed the bowl, and the water simply swayed, spilling gently but never breaking form. Chan-hui never forgot that image. Years later, when he watched Bruce S. interview on TV where he uttered those same words, "Be formless, shapeless, like water," he felt a strange mixture of pride and melancholy. The world had finally caught up to what he'd already seen years earlier in their small family apartment. But witnessing greatness comes with a burden. Bruce's constant intensity could be exhausting. He was obsessed with progress, physically, mentally, spiritually, and that sometimes meant shutting out family. When Bruce left for the U.S., he told Chan-hui something that stuck with him forever. "Don't follow my path, make your own." It was both a warning and a blessing. Bruce feared that his fame, his restless drive, might consume anyone who tried to live in his shadow. In later interviews, Chan-hui spoke briefly about how lonely Bruce had been, even when surrounded by fame. He wasn't chasing attention, he said. He was chasing truth. Those words reveal something only a brother could understand. Where the world saw charisma, Chan-hui saw vulnerability. Where others saw confidence, he saw exhaustion. After Bruce's death, people asked Chan-hui if he ever tried martial arts himself. His answer was simple. "I learned something different. The art of stillness." It was his way of honoring Bruce's legacy without copying it. While Bruce became water, Chan-hui became the riverbank, holding space for the flow, but never trying to outshine it. What's most remarkable is how this quiet brother helped preserve the philosophical side of Bruce's legacy long before fans or scholars did. In private letters and recollections, Chan-hui helped clarify that Jeet Kune Do was never just a martial art. It was a way of thinking, of living, of adapting, and that's exactly what he did with his own life. He adapted without ever breaking. August 7. He lived through the tragedy that nearly destroyed the Lee family. For most people, the death of Bruce Lee in 1973 was a global shock. But for Lee Chan-hui, it was personal, a wound that never fully healed. Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the brother who was larger than life, who had conquered Hollywood, was suddenly gone at only 32. That moment didn't just shatter the Lee family. It changed them forever. When the news reached Hong Kong, reporters swarmed their home. Photographers camped outside, hungry for any glimpse of grief. Chan-hui was there, shielding his mother, Grace Ho, from the flashing cameras, keeping strangers away from the front door. The world wanted a spectacle. He just wanted silence. For weeks, the family lived in mourning. Bruce's body was flown back from Hong Kong to Seattle, his final resting place. But the aftermath wasn't peaceful. Conspiracy theories flooded the media. Talk of curses, secret assassinations, even supernatural causes. The Lee family's grief was turned into tabloid fuel. Through it all, Chan-hui stood guard, refusing interviews, rejecting money offers, and quietly managing family affairs while the chaos raged around them. He once told a friend that the worst part was the loss. It was watching the world treat Bruce like a myth instead of a man. He laughed, he argued, he made mistakes, Chan-hui said. People forget that. That raw honesty reveals just how deep their bond was. He wasn't just mourning a celebrity, he was mourning his big brother. Then came an even darker twist. In 1993, Bruce's son, Brandon Lee, died tragically while filming The Crow. It was as if history had repeated itself. Once again, the headlines screamed about the Lee family curse. And once again, Chan-hui chose silence. But privately, friends said he was devastated. 2 generations of Lees gone too soon. Still, he carried on. He continued to visit their graves quietly, avoiding cameras, leaving simple flowers instead of grand gestures. He became a kind of invisible guardian of the Lee memory. And it's because of people like him, those who chose dignity over fame, that the Lee family's private story didn't even vanish into sensationalism. In fact, decades later, when documentaries began exploring Bruce's life in depth, researchers reached out to Chan-hui for insight. He refused to appear on camera but provided background information and family details that helped shape a more authentic portrayal. Without his quiet involvement, much of the human side of Bruce Lee, his family bonds, his upbringing, his struggles, might never have been understood. So while Bruce Lee's name became a global symbol of power, speed, and philosophy, Lee Chan-hui became the silent architect preserving the truth behind that symbol. He didn't fight with fists or words. He fought by remembering. Yucker 6. He chose a life of obscurity to protect his family's legacy. After Bruce Lee's death, many of his relatives were thrust into an overwhelming spotlight. Studios wanted rights to his story. Magazines offered money for interviews, and fans around the world demanded to know every detail of the Lee family's life. For Lee Chan-hui, this sudden global attention was unbearable. He had lived his entire life quietly in Hong Kong, preferring privacy over performance, and now strangers were calling him the surviving Lee brother, as if that alone defined his identity. But instead of trying to capitalize on his family name, he disappeared. Literally. In the late 1970s, Chan-hui sold most of his possessions, left Hong Kong for a time, and lived quietly under the radar. Rumors swirled. Some said he moved to Canada, others claimed he retreated to a remote village in southern China. The truth is more mundane but far more powerful. He simply chose to live a normal life. No interviews, no film contracts, no martial arts schools. He rejected every attempt to pull him into fame's orbit. Why? Because to him, Bruce Lee's legacy wasn't something to exploit. It was something to protect. He'd seen how the entertainment industry twisted narratives for profit. He watched actors and directors use Bruce's name without understanding his discipline or philosophy. And so, while others built empires from Bruce's image, Chan-hui quietly worked to ensure that the real story remained untouched. In the rare few times he spoke publicly, he emphasized one message. Bruce was not a superhero. He was a man of immense focus, passion, and sacrifice. Chan-hui once said, "People remember his strength, but they forget his loneliness." That single sentence captures what made his silence so meaningful. He refused to let fame distort truth. Living in obscurity also meant financial struggle. Without a high-paying career or public appearances, Chan-hui lived modestly. But he seemed content. Friends described him as calm, almost monk-like, spending his days reading, writing, and occasionally sketching portraits. He didn't crave applause. He craved peace. Ironically, this decision, to step away, may have preserved the purity of the Lee legacy better than anything else. By removing himself from the media circus, he became a quiet counterbalance to the noise. If Bruce's legacy was the blazing flame, Chan-hui became the lantern that protected it from the wind. Some film historians even credit him, indirectly, for keeping the Lee family from being entirely commercialized. When studios in the 1980s began pitching unauthorized Bruce Lee clones and sequels, it was the quiet legal pushback from the family, which Chan-hui discreetly supported, that stopped several exploitative projects. He never appeared in court, never gave statements, but his presence behind the scenes mattered. He wasn't the voice of the Lee family, but he was its conscience. It's fascinating how two brothers, raised under the same roof, took completely opposite paths. One became the most visible martial artist in history. The other became invisible, yet equally vital in preserving what truly mattered. Fame built Bruce's legend. Silence kept it pure. Darga 5. He helped raise Bruce Lee's daughter in the shadow of loss. After Bruce's sudden death, his widow, Linda Lee Cadwell, was left to raise two children, Brandon and Shannon, largely on her own. But few people know that Lee Chan-hui quietly stepped in to help the family from afar. He wasn't wealthy, and he wasn't living in the United States, but he became a source of emotional support and connection to the Lee family's Chinese roots. When Shannon Lee was born in 1969, Bruce was already an international star. But when she grew up, it was her uncle, the quiet man in Hong Kong, who preserved many of the family's old stories. Through letters and visits, he shared details about their grandparents, their cultural traditions, and the spiritual philosophy that had shaped Bruce. One letter, reportedly written by Chan-hui in the early 1980s, spoke about the importance of living between two worlds. He told Shannon that her father had struggled with that, being Chinese in America, Americanized in Hong Kong, and that she would have to learn balance, not choose sides. That piece of advice became something Shannon later echoed in interviews when discussing her family's heritage. Chan-hui's influence didn't come from money or fame, it came from presence. He would visit Seattle when he could, paying respects at Bruce's grave quietly and meeting with family members privately, never announcing himself to fans. People who met him during those visits described him as gentle, humble, and deeply protective of Bruce's children. He reminded them that family comes before fame, something Bruce himself had often said but rarely had time to live by. What's remarkable is that he continued this quiet support even as tragedy struck again. When Brandon Lee died in 1993, the media frenzy returned, even more vicious than before. Rumors, curses, and speculation filled headlines. Shannon Lee was only in her 20s then, and it was Lee Chan-hui, now older and wiser, who reached out privately, offering comfort and words of resilience. "You cannot fight darkness with anger," he told her, "only with light." Those words seem simple, but they reveal the moral foundation of the Lee family. Each generation faced unimaginable loss, and yet, through quiet dignity, they kept moving forward. Bruce taught the world how to fight. Chan-hui showed the world how to endure. Even today, Shannon Lee continues to manage the Bruce Lee Foundation, keeping her father's legacy alive through education and philosophy rather than action movies. While she rarely speaks of her uncle publicly, those close to the family acknowledge his impact as the quiet bridge between generations, the man who carried the Lee family's emotional history when no one else could. His involvement reminds us that legacy isn't just about fame or success. It is about continuity. Bruce Lee may have taught millions how to move like water, but it was his brother who helped ensure that wisdom flowed on, quietly, through the people he loved. For 4. He became the keeper of Bruce Lee's lost writings. Most fans know about the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, the famous collection of Bruce Lee's notes and philosophies published after his death. But what very few realize is that Lee Chan-hui quietly played a key role in ensuring those writings were preserved. After Bruce passed away, his notebooks, filled with sketches, personal thoughts, and philosophical fragments, were scattered across Hong Kong, Los Angeles, and Seattle. Some were in storage, others in private hands. Many were never meant for the public eye. During the late 1970s, when chaos surrounded Bruce's estate, a small number of these journals found their way back to Hong Kong. It was here that Chan-hui, who had already withdrawn from public life, helped collect, catalog, and protect several personal items, including letters between Bruce and their parents. He kept them away from opportunistic collectors who tried to buy or sell fragments of Bruce A.'s handwriting. To him, these weren't memorabilia. They were pieces of a soul. According to family acquaintances, Chan-hui treated Bruce's writings like sacred relics. He would sit quietly at night, rereading his brother's notes on philosophy, martial arts, and life, sometimes whispering them aloud. He once remarked to a close friend, "When I read his words, it feels like he's still teaching me." It was through his careful curation that many fragments survived long enough to later inspire new books and documentaries. Scholars researching Bruce's lesser-known ideas, like his studies on psychology, acting, and self-expression, often traced their leads back to materials protected by the Lee family in Hong Kong. Though Chan-hui was never officially credited, insiders knew he had been one of the first to organize and preserve them. In a time when Bruce's fame was turning into a global industry, that quiet act of preservation was heroic. It's easy to underestimate how fragile history can be. One lost letter, one misplaced notebook, and an entire chapter of understanding disappears. By keeping those materials safe, Chan-hui didn't just honor his brother, he protected the intellectual foundation of Bruce's entire legacy. And what makes this story even more poignant is that he never sought recognition for it. In interviews, he avoided discussing the details, saying only, "Some words are meant to be remembered, not marketed." That line reveals everything about his philosophy. He believed memory was sacred, that sharing truth should come from love, not profit. In a world where celebrity estates often become brands, Lee Chan-hui quietly did the opposite. He became the invisible librarian of his brother's mind. His care allowed historians, fans, and martial artists to glimpse the true depth of Bruce's intellect, beyond the muscles and movies, into the mind of a philosopher whose thoughts might have otherwise vanished. Letter 3. He represented the family's quiet resistance to exploitation. The 1980s were a turbulent time for the Lee family legacy. Bruce Lee's name had become a gold mine, and Hong Kong's film industry was flooded with so-called Bruceploitation movies. Low-budget knockoffs that imitated his image, his fighting style, even his face. Actors were renamed Bruce Lee, Dragon Lee, and Bruce Lee, all pretending to carry the torch of the real dragon. Posters showed doctored photos of Bruce or claimed based on his final teachings. It was a circus, and for the Lee family, deeply painful. Grace Ho, Bruce's mother, was aging, and the constant exploitation of her late son's image was a wound that never closed. Lee Chan-hui, meanwhile, had kept to himself for years, but when he saw the exploitation reach ridiculous extremes, even Bruce Lee vs. Dracula and the clones of Bruce Lee, he quietly stepped forward. While he wasn't a lawyer or a businessman, he began communicating discreetly with trusted people close to the family, including Bruce's widow Linda and U.S. legal advisors, to warn them about how Hong Kong studios were using the Lee name without consent. He gathered examples of fake contracts, bootleg merchandise, and pirated footage, helping provide documentation for legal action abroad. He never appeared in court, and his name rarely surfaced in public records, but within the small circle managing Bruce's intellectual property, everyone knew who he was. He wasn't loud, but he was effective, one associate later said. He understood that protecting Bruce wasn't about money. It was about respect. That sense of moral duty shaped his entire life. He believed that Bruce Lee's name should stand for authenticity, not exploitation. "If they copy him," he reportedly said, "they don't understand him." His quiet resistance to commercialization became a moral compass for how the Lee family handled Bruce E.'s estate in the following decades. In fact, it was this same principle that inspired the creation of the Bruce Lee Foundation years later, led by Shannon Lee. The foundation's focus on education, philosophy, and cultural understanding, rather than just movies or merchandise, echoes Chan-hui as belief that Bruce as true value was intellectual, not commercial. There's a poetic symmetry in that. Bruce Lee fought against stereotypes in Hollywood. Decades later, his brother fought against the exploitation of that same image in Asia. Two different battles, same warrior spirit, but where Bruce fought with energy and charisma, Chan-hui fought with patience and restraint. He became the still water beneath the storm, the one quietly ensuring that the family name remained a symbol of discipline, philosophy, and truth, not cheap imitation. His refusal to join the media frenzy wasn't weakness, it was strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to make an impact. He lived with dignity, defended his brother's name, and in doing so, defined a different kind of heroism. Because in the end, not all dragons breathe fire. Some guard the flame, silently, faithfully, until the world is ready to see it for what it really is. He became a living example of Bruce Lee's own teachings. If Bruce Lee embodied movement, Lee Chan-hui embodied stillness. Over the years, people who met him often remarked how calm and centered he seemed, as if nothing could disturb his peace. It's easy to think of him as the opposite of Bruce, but in truth, he was the living embodiment of Bruce's deepest philosophy, self-mastery. Bruce often said, "Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do." But he also believed that true mastery meant balance, being able to adapt, to flow, to control one's emotions even amid chaos. Chan-hui's entire life was a reflection of that ideal. He didn't fight for fame or wealth. He didn't lash out against tabloids or imitators. He simply lived humbly, with discipline, grace, and purpose. Those who knew him described him as almost monastic. He woke up early, exercised quietly, meditated, and read for hours. He loved philosophy. Not just martial arts philosophy, but classic Chinese thinkers like Laozi and Zhuangzi. When asked why he never followed Bruce's path to martial arts, he once replied, "I followed his path of mind, not muscle." That statement says everything. Even though he lived far from Hollywood, his lifestyle reflected Bruce's famous saying, "Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own." Chan-hui had absorbed his brother's values, discipline, simplicity, awareness, but had built a life entirely his own. He didn't reject Bruce's legacy, he refined it into a quieter, more sustainable version. In a way, he proved something profound. Bruce Lee's legacy wasn't about fame or physical perfection. It was about how a person lives, how they treat others, how they face loss, how they maintain integrity when no one's watching. Friends said that in his final years, Chan-hui would occasionally teach philosophy and meditation to small groups of students. Not martial arts, not self-defense, but self-awareness. He spoke about the stillness inside the storm, and how fame could destroy a person if they lost connection to themselves. He rarely mentioned Bruce by name, but his teachings carried the same energy. The idea that the ultimate fight in life is not against others, but against your own ego. In that sense, the forgotten Lee brother became something much deeper, a living lesson of everything Bruce ever tried to teach the world. 1. His legacy is the balance behind the legend. When people talk about the Lee family, the spotlight always lands on Bruce, the dragon who broke barriers, shattered stereotypes, and redefined human potential. But what they often forget is that legends cannot exist without balance. Fire needs stillness, motion needs rest, and sound needs silence to give it meaning. Lee Chan-hui was that silence. He never sought fame, never tried to prove himself, and yet his quiet existence gave depth to Bruce's story, reminding the world that even legends come from families of flesh and blood. His life was proof that greatness isn't just measured by visibility. Sometimes it's measured by restraint. Bruce's power came from movement. Chan-hui's power came from his refusal to move where the world pushed him. Together, they form two halves of a larger truth, that legacy isn't about how loudly you live, but how deeply you stay true to who you are. In the decades since his brother's death, Lee Chan-hui remained an invisible guardian of the Lee name. He passed away quietly, far from the cameras, his story barely noted in the headlines. But to those who truly understand the Lee family, his death wasn't an end. It was a completion. The last piece of balance restored to the legend of Bruce Lee. Every empire needs its keeper. Every flame needs its protector. And every dragon, even one as fierce as Bruce, needs the calm reflection of still water beside it. That was Lee Chan-hui, the brother who never fought for attention but fought for truth. The brother who proved that not all heroes need to roar. So the next time you hear the name Bruce Lee, remember that somewhere in the background stood another Lee, quiet, loyal, and unwavering. The brother who carried the weight of the family legacy without ever asking for recognition. Lee Chan-hui may not have dazzled on screen, but he gave the Lee name something even rarer: humility and peace. His life reminds us that greatness doesn't always mean standing in the spotlight. Sometimes it means protecting the light itself. And in a world obsessed with fame, perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of the people behind the legends. Hit the Join button to become a channel member and unlock exclusive behind-the-scenes content. And if you'd like to support us directly, use the Super Thanks button below. Every contribution helps us keep bringing forgotten stories like this one back to life. See you in the next episode, where history's hidden voices finally get to speak.